Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a seriously fascinating faith-based methodology from our source material that's designed to combat mental torment. Now, whether you personally share this faith or you're just kind of curious about the psychology of belief, the framework we're going to unpack here offers a really profound reframing of how to interact with your own mind. So let's just jump right in. We've got to start with this completely jarring question. Are all your thoughts actually yours? I mean, really think about that for a second. For years, the speaker in our source material was literally trapped by a relentless, cruel voice inside their head. You know the one. The voice that replays every single mistake and spins your tiniest worries into these absolute worst-case scenarios. But everything changed when they shattered this universally held assumption that the voice in their head was actually their own. That's the foundational paradigm shift here. Not every thought that pops into your mind actually belongs to you. Okay, but before we get into the nuts and bolts of how this works, we really need to establish a critical, deeply empathetic disclaimer from the source. Relying on a spiritual framework like this absolutely does not replace medical professionals. The speaker is super clear on this. If you're dealing with clinical anxiety or depression, telling you to just have more faith is not only untrue, it's honestly pretty cruel. Sitting down with a good doctor or a counselor, that's a mercy, not a weakness. This spiritual reframing is meant to change the ground you stand on, but it works right alongside real help for real conditions. So, here's what's really fascinating. The source completely reinterprets Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus says, "Take no thought, saying, 'What shall we eat?'" For years, the speaker heard this as this harsh scolding, like, "Hey, just stop worrying." But if you look at the exact phrasing, a totally different meaning emerges. Jesus isn't saying the anxious thought will never show up at your door. He's saying don't take it. Don't pick it up. Don't carry it inside your house. For the speaker, this proves the central theory. Thoughts are external entities. You see, you can't refuse something that is fundamentally you, but you can absolutely refuse something being handed to you from the outside. And that perfectly illustrates the source's most powerful metaphor. It's the difference between intruders and true family. The speaker argues that you've basically been letting fears, shame, and flat-out lies walk straight into your mind, pull up a chair, and sit at your table like they own the place. You've been calling them family, but they are actually intruders. So why do we mistake them for guests? Well, much like that subtle little seed of doubt planted way back in the Garden of Eden, these intruders are sneaky. They sneak in using your own accent. They use first-person pronouns, saying things like, "I am worthless," or "I'm going to fail," completely tricking you into accepting them as your own honest conclusions. So how in the world do you filter these thoughts out? Well, the speaker applies a brilliant test from 1 Corinthians 14. They point out that God is the author of peace, right? Not confusion. So conviction, which comes from God, feels like a good father's hand on your shoulder. It gently pulls you home, drawing you toward correction. Condemnation, on the flip side, just violently shoves you away. It drags you straight toward hopelessness and despair. It's basically the voice of an accuser wearing a father's coat. If a thought drives you off a cliff into a dark pit, you can know instantly, without a doubt, that it did not come from a loving source. Now, let's talk about 2 a.m. We have all been there. You're just staring blankly at the ceiling while your brain suddenly decides it's time to review every single awkward conversation you've had since 2014. This filter we just talked about is specifically designed for the pitch black of the night, because that's when these mental battles are usually fought, right? In total isolation while the rest of the world is sound asleep. You need a framework that holds up when you're completely exhausted and under heavy attack. Which brings us to the exact verse that flipped the script entirely for the speaker. 2 Corinthians 10:5, bringing into captivity every thought. Now notice the language here. The speaker points out that Paul isn't describing some passive victim lying helpless in bed. No, he is describing a soldier on a battlefield, taking prisoners. For years, the speaker lived as the prisoner in the cell of their own mind, with their anxious thoughts standing guard outside. But this verse revealed it was meant to be the exact opposite. You are meant to be the jailer. Sure, you can't stop the thoughts from showing up, but you absolutely get to decide which ones stay and which ones are clapped in irons. Okay, so how do we actually do this? How does this build into a real, actionable methodology? The source lays out this incredibly exact 4-step combative framework. Step 1, catch the thought right at the door. Step 2, test it against the word. Is it agreeing with scripture or fighting it? Step 3, speak the truth out loud. And step 4, replace the thought entirely. Now, the speaker emphasizes a critical, absolute necessity here. You cannot just lie there in the dark and endlessly psychoanalyze the lie in silent, circling worry. You have to answer it out loud. Speaking it out loud is what actually breaks the grip of the thought. Let's actually look at this mental back and forth in practice so you can see how it works. Here comes the first anxious strike, a lie dressed up right in the speaker's own voice. It says, "You failed too many times. God is finished with you." Now, the natural human instinct here is to turn this over and over, debate it, and agonizingly wonder if it just might be true. But instead of debating it in their head, the speaker immediately counterpunches with a spoken, scriptural response. His mercies are new every morning. By doing this, they're actually mirroring Jesus in the wilderness. When tempted, Jesus didn't debate the enemy on his own terms. He simply answered out loud with "it is written," 3 different times. The speaker argues that if the central figure of their faith fought a grueling mental battle using only the spoken word of Scripture, well, that's literally the ultimate model for victory. And of course, the attacks usually don't just stop at one, right? So here is the second rapid-fire mental attack, the absolute flood of future what-ifs. It's that cold, shapeless dread about a tomorrow that hasn't even happened yet. It rolls in during those small hours of the morning, trying to completely overwhelm your mind with impossible, terrifying scenarios. And again, the immediate counterattack is to answer it out loud. Remember step 4 from earlier? You must replace the thought. The source text warns that an empty, swept-out mind will literally just let the old thought walk right back in through the front door, and it'll bring 7 worse thoughts with it. So actively filling your mind with these specific words leaves absolutely no empty room for the intruder to sit back down. To execute this consistently, the speaker built a robust, tactical armory of verses to counter very distinct feelings. So, when the spirit of fear attacks, bam, it's met with 2 Timothy 1:7, power, love, and a sound mind. When that gnawing sense of lack creeps in, it's countered with Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And when the what-ifs flood the brain, Philippians 4 becomes the weapon of choice. It is a highly organized, totally intentional approach to mental defense. Now, underneath all these tactical steps lies a much, much deeper revelation from the source material, the psychological cage of constant grinding, striving. For years, the speaker was basically trying to fight their way toward peace, just clawing, striving, trying to figure every single thing out to solve the problem, using their own strength. But the tragic irony? The striving itself was the trap. The fighting is the actual cage that's keeping you anxious. This realization brilliantly reframes the entire approach to the battle. You see, you've probably been treating peace as this far-off prize you're chasing across a field, hoping that if you just solve enough problems, your mind will finally grant you permission to rest. But the paradigm shift is this. Peace is actually the settled ground you are meant to fight from. You don't enter peace by gritting your teeth, you enter it by surrendering and laying your weapon down. The source points straight to Colossians 3, which says, "Let the peace of God rule in your hearts." But if we dig into the Greek definition of the word rule here, it literally means to sit as the umpire. The umpire is the one who makes the absolute final call on what's in and what's out. So peace isn't just some warm, fuzzy feeling. It's the active, authoritative umpire that decides which thoughts are allowed to stay in your mind and which ones are thrown right out of the game. To really ground this idea, the speaker uses this beautiful, reassuring metaphor of physical sleep. Think about it. Tonight, when you lie down, you're not going to consciously command your heart to beat, or your lungs to breathe, or instruct your cells on how to mend in the dark. You are simply going to rest. And while you rest, your body quietly accomplishes 1,000 unseen things you could never manage if you sat up all night trying to control them. This is exactly how true spiritual rest is supposed to function, allowing God to arrange the unseen realm while you completely surrender the need to control it all. And that brings us to this vivid, really arresting imagery. Listen, your mind was designed to be your servant, not your master. The constant grinding stress you feel, it's just a symptom of a soul that has tried to climb up onto God's own throne and is trying to run the entire universe from a chair it was never built to hold. Relentless anxiety comes from carrying a structural weight your mind was simply never designed to lift. The speaker says God is gently asking you to climb down, hand the burden over, and finally realize it was never yours to carry in the first place. As we bring this narrative to a close, we really have to look at the reality of the healing process, because the truth is the chains don't always come off all at once. For the speaker, it was a slow and quiet process, one thought taken captive, then another, and then 1,000 more. Day by day, the truth eventually wins the ground back. And again, the source validates that seeking out a wise counselor or a doctor during this slow process is a deep act of mercy. You are never, ever meant to fight this alone in the dark. So, we're going to leave you with this final provocative thought to summarize this entire paradigm shift. What if peace isn't the absence of your mental battle? What if it's the umpire that finally gets to make the call on what thoughts are allowed to stay? If this explainer has shifted how you view your own mental landscape, I highly encourage you to dive deeper into the source material. Thank you so much for learning with us today, and we'll catch you next time.